my goodness, you guys, I love putting this one on my outer corner. Oh, shoot. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be ranking all of my Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes. It has been a couple of years since I've done one of these videos. My collection has grown over the last year or so, and things might have also shifted a little bit. So we are going to rank everything today. I'm going to share with you guys my rankings of the mid-size palettes. I have most of them with the exception of maybe one or two. I know that she just came out with a new one, which I do not have yet. And I also have one full-size palette from her. And then I have 6 of the mini palettes. We'll rank those kind of separately. Should be a fun one. I love my Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes. As you guys know, I know they are insanely expensive, but her formula is really good. And I kind of feel like this eye look that I created today, which is with my number 4 ranked palette, proved it. So that's what we are doing today. We'll be doing a lot of swatching, some close-ups, should be a fun one. Hope you guys are excited. Before we jump into the eyeshadow palettes, I want to wish any of you that are new a very special welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoy this video. Please consider subscribing before you leave. Make sure your notifications are turned on. And now let's get right to the palettes. Okay, so we are going to start with the mini palettes first. I'm such a big fan of these. These are one of my #1 recommendations if someone is asking for gift-worthy makeup. These are the things that I recommend the most. The price point is pretty modest. I think they're $25 a piece. That price may have gone up. I haven't checked for a little while. Seems like everything's gone up more recently. But I think they make a great little gift for under $30. They're super travel friendly, and for just like a basic makeup user, these are really fun to gift. So as I mentioned, I have 6 of these, and we're gonna rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite. Starting with number 6. I have to go with the Mini Love palette. I still kind of feel like I don't know this palette as well as I maybe should, but the few times I have used it, I usually pull this one out around Valentine's Day. I think I've had it for about 2 years now. There's just a couple things I don't love the most about it. Now I do love my berry tones, but these 2 shimmers on the corners, I just don't love the most for my skin tone. I don't dislike them. They're just not my favorite. I do love the 3 shades in the middle, particularly this shimmer for the inner corner is such a beautiful shade, and also the dark purple for the outer corner. Stunning. If you are into pink and purple toned looks, you will like this one. The formulas are all great. It's not bad by any means, but I've had this thing for 2 years and I've probably only used it like 4 times total, which is not very good. Probably not the best purchase I ever made. In the number 5 spot, I'm gonna go with the Mini Glam palette. It looks like I should love this palette, and for some reason, I just don't love it as much as I feel like I should. I definitely don't like it as much as the larger Glam palette, unfortunately, because that thing is very expensive. It's just kind of basic. It's kind of boring. And while I don't mind basics, we will talk about some basics that rank pretty high. This one just kind of misses the mark for me. It's not very exceptional. Some of these shades, this one in particular, is basically the same color as my skin tone. Maybe that's one of the reasons I feel like this doesn't stand out on me, because that first shade just is not really suited for my light medium skin tone. It doesn't show up a whole lot on me, even though it does have a lot of pigment in it. I do love the dark brown. I love the champagne. This is a really nice champagne. It's a nice warm champagne that's not yellow toned. It's perfect. I can't explain how pretty this is. It actually kind of reminds me of the center shade in the Nomad palette from Juvia's Place. You guys know I love that shade. That's very pretty. I just kind of feel like it's like too simple. And the eye looks that come from this one are not as glamorous or as polished as most of the other palettes give me. Ranked at number 4, I'm gonna go with the Mini Zendo palette. This one is very pretty. I think it's kind of a unique and slightly kind of an interesting color story. You get these kind of pinks and purples and then a silver is thrown in the middle. I kind of love that, but I also kind of feel like it is a little bit odd. Like maybe it doesn't go the best with some of the other shades. It just makes it a little more confusing when I reach into this palette. Like, am I gonna go pink on the inner corner or am I gonna go silver? Kind of feel like I can't go both. Requires a little bit more thinking than most of the other 5-pan palettes that are so basic that you really don't have to think much when you use them. But that said, I do really like the shades inside here. I think my one criticism is I do kind of wish that this shimmer, this kind of purpley shimmer right here, was actually a matte. That's partly because I just love her deep, rich mattes. I would especially love it if it was in a cream to powder formula, which I really love, but that's okay. I can still use it in my outer corner if I want to, which is typically how I will use a shade this dark. It's a pretty color story. I do love the pink and peach tones in here. They're really stunning. And generally speaking, I like that it is a little bit different and a little bit interesting. Now my top 3. Now these ones I really, really love. I feel like there's a separation between my top 3 and my bottom 3. My bottom 3 If I could go back, I wouldn't miss any one of these if I lost them, for example. My top 3, however, if I lost one or it shattered, I would go out and replace immediately. Starting with this one at number 3, this is the Mini Nude palette. Again, talking about the neutrals, I did not feel this way as much with the Mini Glam palette, but this one, there's something very special about the tones in this one. It is warm, so keep that in mind, whereas the Mini Glam on a warm to cool scale, so say 1 being the coolest, 10 being the warmest tone, this is probably a level 4, just slightly more cool tone than being right there in the middle. This one I would say is like an 8. These are all very, very warm. This bronze right here is almost a cooler bronze, but that's really just compared to the other shades that have quite a bit more orange in them, but they're not orange. They're still neutrals. They're just warmer neutrals. The looks that come out of this are so beautiful, especially when I have a little bit of tan. This creates the perfect summertime bronzy look for me. I love the champagne inside here. I've debated moving this champagne to one of the other palettes that we'll talk about here when we get to the larger ones that does not have a champagne in it, that I think having one shade like this would make that palette one of my favorites of all time. We'll get to that in a minute, but I love this one. It's a perfectly curated palette as far as shimmers to mattes and light to dark shades. It just gives me the most perfect eye look that is stunning. And you do get 2 different shimmers. This one's a little bit more kind of coppery and warm. This one's a little bit more cool and bronzy, but both are stunning. Coming in at number 2, I'm gonna go with my Mini Retro. This was my favorite one for a very long time. I do still absolutely love it. It's one of my most used ones. I don't know if you guys can see this shade right here, which is kind of like a silvery peach shimmer. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. It has a pretty serious dent in it. I'm going to run out of this palette. Maybe that's why I haven't used it as much lately, because I'm kind of saving it. And maybe that's why my number 1 palette inched this one out. But it's a beautiful one. These greens are the greens made for someone that absolutely does not like greens at all on their eyes. They're so beautiful. They're particularly perfect for me because they exactly match the shade of my eyes, which are mostly gray, but they have like a tiny bit of like blue-green in them. That's exactly what these shades are like. They're mostly gray with just the tiniest bit of color in them. Super pretty, easy to wear. They actually pair beautifully with the peaches in here. This is a color story that regardless of what I dip for, whether I skip over the greens altogether or combine the peaches and the greens in any combination, I can't screw it up. Every look that I've ever done with this palette just turns out perfectly. And that leads me to my number 1. This is the Mini Biba palette. I kind of feel like this is not the highest ranked of her mini palettes looking online. I love this one though. I think one of the reasons I love this one especially is that it includes a cream to powder formula. This is one of my favorite formulas that Natasha Denona does. It's so beautiful. There's something about this formula that I think is very favorable if you have more fine lines or wrinkles on or around your eyes. It's beautiful, it builds. Say putting this one as a base and then topping it with this deeper matte, I don't know if you'd call that a brown. It's like a red toned brown. It's so pretty. It gives you so much richness and dimension. And then the other shades inside here are stunning. They're so stunning. Perfect transition shades. This one's a little bit lighter, a little bit more of kind of a pinky peach. This one's just a good, more mid-tone, peach toned brown, and then a perfect shimmer in the center. Some of the prettiest eye looks come out of this simple little palette. It's like a nude palette that leans a little bit peach in tone and slightly pink in tone. I wasn't exactly expecting a lot out of this when I first got it. It kind of looked like a simple color story, but it's risen to the top pretty quickly. Prettiest looks come out of this little palette. Moving on to my larger palettes. I have 9 of her mid-sized palettes, 1 of her full-sized palettes. So let's just go through all of these, starting with number 10. Number 10 is gonna stay in the same spot. It's the Natasha Denona Love palette. This is just a palette that's a little bit too colorful for me. There's a lot of bold colors in here. I don't mind pinks and purples, but these are bold pinks, especially the pinks. The purples I actually like quite a bit more, the cooler tones, but basically every single matte pink, this red right here, even that shimmery kind of like Pepto-Bismol color right there, they are seriously bold. A little too bold for what I like in a pink or purple eye look. I like more neutral, kind of softer berry tones on my eyes. And when I am in the mood for a little bit more color, it's not often bright pinks and bright reds. However, I won't declutter this palette because there are a handful of shades inside here that I think are just exceptional. This silver and the cream to powder like purple shade right here next to it. I love putting this one on my outer corner. It is so stunning. The formula is so stunning. It's not a bad palette. It's really just the color story of this one is not very me. Ranked at number 9, this is probably gonna surprise a lot of people, maybe not if you've watched my other videos, but I'm gonna go with the bronze palette. It is a good palette, I do like it, but it has a couple of fatal flaws. Okay, fatal's maybe a strong word, but a couple of flaws that keep this one from ranking a little bit higher. As I mentioned, the champagne and the mini nude palette, if it had this champagne in it, I would like it so much more. It would probably be in my top 5 because I feel like I am missing a light shimmer for my inner corner or inner lid, which I always like to put because it really helps open up my smaller eyes. Almost everything in here is pretty much a mid-tone, so not too light or too dark, which makes this not as versatile of a palette as I would like it to be. I do think there is a little bit of overlap in a couple of the shades, so I would have really liked to see just a little bit more variation, maybe one more deeper shade, 1 or 2 more lighter shimmers, or even a lighter matte. That said, however, if you are into your bronzes, I mean, you get like red tone bronzes in here, yellowy tone, orangey tone bronzes in here, any variety of bronze toned warm look that you might want to do, as long as you don't want to put a light shimmer on your inner corner, you're gonna get that from this palette. There are some really beautiful shades in here. I do like it. I just really wish it had those 1 or 2 missing shades. Then this would be a perfect palette. Ranked at number 8, I'm gonna go with my Natasha Denona Pastel palette. This one might be one of my favorite packaging. I love the ombre, the pastel ombre in here. This is a very fun palette. I really like this one. It's just not a color story I always am going to reach for. I have to be in a very special kind of colorful mood to play with this one. Now, I actually have said this many times, I don't think the colors in here are as intimidating as they look off the bat for someone that is quite intimidated by color. These are colors that I can actually wear, and I can even wear the greens and the blues inside here because they're much more pastel than kind of primary color boldness. There are some really fun shimmers in here. It's a beautiful palette. It's just not a color story that I'm gonna reach for on an everyday, just average basis. Ranked at number 7, I've got to go with my Natasha Denona Safari palette. This is discontinued, sadly, but it's one of my very favorite palettes to pull out in the fall. Just look at this color story. Every type of matte you could ever need to create any type of slightly colorful or very neutral eyeshadow look from is in this palette, and some really unique and beautiful shades inside here. This green in the top center, and actually even like the teal right next to it, some of the prettiest outer corner shades ever if you like those tones in the fall. I love that you get some warm browns and oranges in here. You get some berry tones. If you have a basic kind of warm pink or golden champagne, it would pair beautifully with any of the mattes that you would combine in this palette. It's a really fun one. I'm sad that it's been discontinued. I had heard over the years a couple of people say they didn't like the formula of this palette. I think it's fine. I don't have any issues with it at all. It is obviously missing shimmers, but that said, I still love this palette, and especially when fall rolls around. Number 6, I'm going to go with the Zendo palette. This one is so much fun. Such a fun eyeshadow palette, a lot of variety. If you like some variety and you are not afraid of color, this is a really fun palette for, again, not the person that's into bold color. I love the variety in this palette. You get, it's kind of heavy on the peaches and pinks. You get some browns in here, but I love that this whole section over here is kind of a totally different direction, more like blue tones, kind of teals, and this matte seafoam kind of light white-based green is so fun. I love this shade. It's one of those shades when I opened this palette, I was annoyed at the shade because I was thinking, man, you should have put like a champagne right there. I know you guys, I'm so obsessed with the champagne. It's such an essential eyeshadow for me to reach for in any palette, but this one surprised me. It's really fun to combine with some of the blue or green tones in here. It even pairs beautifully with some of the peaches or the browns. It looks really interesting on the inner corner. I would say it has more of a white base than it does like a green kind of teal base because it's so light. It's just a really fun pop of color to put on your inner corner or your inner lid. Really beautiful palette. I love this one. I think it's great. Okay, now things get serious. We are down to my top 5. This is where things get even harder. Number 5, I had to go with my Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. You guys, this is such a beautiful palette. If I remember right, the last time I checked, if this is still available online, I haven't checked for it for a while, but it had one of the highest ratings of all of her palettes. Such a fun one. I know these yellow oranges right here might seem intimidating, but they are so fun to pop into your crease and then put something more neutral on the lid and maybe ground it with like this berry tone right here. So many beautiful looks in this one. A super fun palette for the summertime. One of my favorite summertime palettes. It is such a beautiful one. So much fun. If you like strawberry lemonade, that's what this palette kind of reminds me of. It's a very fun one to play with. And even though it looks a little bit colorful, maybe a little bit intimidating, I've never thought any of the looks that came out of this palette were so colorful that I wouldn't just wear them to the grocery store or something. They're still very wearable. Ranked at number 4 is the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes today, which almost made me feel like I should rank higher because I am obsessed with this eye look today. It is the My Dream palette. Such a beautiful, beautiful palette. I love the variety inside here. Now, when I talked about variety in the Zendo palette, these kind of remind me of each other in the variety that they give, but this one's a little bit more colorful. This one's a little bit more for someone that is into more neutrals, leaning berry tones. This palette kind of reminds me of a couple of her other palettes mixed together. It kind of reminds me of like the peach tones from the Zendo palette mixed with the berry tones of the Retro palette. But then you also have some like warm bronzes in here as well, and even a couple cool tones. It's a really interesting one, very fun color story. You can do something cool, you can do something warm, a lot of peaches, some pinks, and there's even a duochrome in here that's so pretty. It's kind of a purple, but when you turn it to the side, it has a green shift. Did you guys see that green right there? So much fun. Such an interesting color if you like that duochrome effect. So let me just quickly walk you guys through how I created this look today. So I combined these two shades right here, threw those in my crease. I put a tiny bit of this just right on the socket right there. Then I smoked out my outer corners, starting with a little bit of this, and then a little bit of this deep brown just right along the lash line. And then on my lid, I popped this shade, one of my favorites. It's kind of like a peachy gold. It's like a fiery orange, actually. Beautiful color. So I put that all over the center of my lid, and then on the inner third, I put this kind of champagne gold right here. It's really more of just like a nude. It's slightly warm. It's kind of like a light fleshy color. I don't know. It's a really interesting lid shade, actually. Very, very pretty, but I love how this look turned out. I've been so happy with every look that I've created with this palette. I love the pinks in here. You do get a couple of the cream to powder formulas that are really fun. The duochrome is really interesting and different. It's a very fun palette. One of her most highly rated palettes. If you look at the ratings on Sephora's website, this one is rated very, very highly, and I understand why. It is amazing. Ranked at number 3, I'm going to go with the Retro palette. This is the one that I feel like has climbed up in the ranking. And part of the reason for that is that my liking for berry tones in general has grown over the last 2 years. Next to neutrals, berry tones are probably my next favorite colors to reach for. They're just so soft and feminine and flattering on the eyes. They're more colorful than you would get with just like basic brown, either warm or cool tone neutrals. But I would still say they're wearable. I just love the shades inside here, and this is the most perfect berry tone palette that I've ever seen. I have collected quite a few berry tones in my collection, and this is a perfect berry toned palette. You get warmer berries in here, you get a handful of neutral shades, you get some cool tones in here, a lot of pinks and purples, but they're very soft, muted pinks and purples that are much more wearable than what I talked about in the Love palette. It's a much easier palette to wear than that one was, but there's still a lot of variety in here. I love that you get a matte white in here, and it's not exactly a white. It's like has the tiniest bit of like a warm pink to it, but it's quite light on the eyes, and I love having a matte white in a palette because it gives the palette so much versatility. You also get some really beautiful pink lid shades in here, some beautiful shimmers, some cream to powder formulas. It's just a fun one. I love the looks that come out of this palette. They're so feminine looking, but soft and pretty and not too over the top. Whether you're going more smoky or more everyday, this palette can do no wrong, in my opinion. Ranked at number 2, you guys hear it? Mine's a little bit defective, is my Natasha Denona Glam palette. It is so squeaky. I really do need to like maybe try out some WD-40 on this one. This one was my number 1 palette for a very long time. It has now been replaced, but this one's still way up there. I absolutely love this one. If you like your cool tone neutrals, this is the ultimate cool toned neutral palette. For anyone that does not like warm tones on them, I highly, highly recommend this palette. It's the most perfect color story. Everything in here is a neutral to cool. So on my scale, I did a scale several months back where 1 being the coolest of neutral tones, 10 being the warmest of your neutral tones. Everything in here is 5 and below. And I would say more like 3 to 5 range. Really beautiful shades inside here. This kind of reminds me of like the perfect wedding palette. The looks that come out of this are very glamorous, but they're also very neutral. They're kind of soft. They're kind of feminine looking. I don't know, it just kind of reminds me of a palette that I imagine someone that does a lot of bridal work would probably use something like this a lot, because nothing's too warm, but also they're not just gray. I mean, they do have some color in them, and I imagine these would look good on just about anyone. I mean, I prefer warm tones, but even I like this palette, and I think that kind of says something about it. It's just really well done. There's a variety of beautiful lid shimmers in here, some more pink tones, some silver, some kind of bronze. It's a very fun palette. I know it looks kind of basic and boring. If you like your basics, particularly your cooler basics, this is probably the palette for you. And that leaves us with my number one palette. I'm going with the Natasha Denona Retro Glam. From the packaging to the color story inside, this is the perfect Mandy palette. There's quite a few neutrals inside here, but you also get some color that's nice and soft and not over the top. I love green tones, particularly when they're kind of like teal in color or even army in color, and you get some variety of greens in here that are so beautiful. You also get some pinks, which I really love. You get some bronzes, some good transition shades. You get these kind of seafoam colors. It is such a fun palette. This is one of the few palettes that when I open it up, it just makes me excited to do my makeup. I love playing with this palette. Every look that I've ever done with it is so much fun. You can go monochromatic with all pinks or all greens or all just like basic neutrals, or you can mix and match. You can combine the pinks and greens together. The possibilities in this little palette are endless, but every look that I've ever done with it has been kind of unique and different without being too bold or too colorful to where someone that's a little bit more basic like me is going to be uncomfortable in it. It's just a fun palette in that way. It's the perfect amount of color. Nothing's too crazy, but you can have so much fun with this one, and it's so unique. I don't have a single eyeshadow palette in my collection that even comes close to this type of a color story. It's just so different from anything that I have seen. It's very highly rated. This is another one of a few on the Sephora website that has fantastic reviews, so I'm not the only one that loves this one. If you don't trust my word, because I rave about almost everything, especially when it's Natasha Denona, but it is a very fun one. If you're not afraid of a little bit of color, I highly recommend this one. It is, in my opinion, the perfect palette. And that is it, you guys. Those are all of my Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes ranked. What did you guys think of my ranking? Were you surprised by any of these? Are you disgusted by the gluttony of me having so many eyeshadow palettes, expensive eyeshadow palettes at that? Feel free to let me know. I was kind of disgusted. Hopefully going through these though was helpful for you guys. Maybe if you've been wanting to save up for one, maybe for like a Christmas gift coming up, hopefully this will help you looking at the swatches and hearing my thoughts on some of the different palettes and how I see them. I'm also going to mention now not all of these, but some of these palettes have been duped by Alter Ego. I will link their website down below. I love Alter Ego. I think they do a great job duping some of these palettes. I know people have different thoughts on the dupe palettes, but if you don't have $69 to spend on an eyeshadow palette, which I would imagine is most of us, that is insanely expensive. If I did not do YouTube, I would probably not be buying any of these. But I do think the Alter Ego palettes really do compare to these, and they're much more affordable. So I'll link those down below for you guys as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching, for stopping by. I hope you are enjoying my full month of nothing new so far. Let me remind you one more time, make sure you subscribe before you leave, and I will see all of you in my next video. Bye. Okay, now I have to start swatching all of these, so pray for my forearms. It's gonna be rough. We've been watching The Office lately. My 13-year-old son is obsessed with The Office. He's like going through this like newfound obsession, and I haven't watched it very much since they took it off of Netflix. That's just what we need, more television, right? Said no mother ever. Squeaks when you close it. I feel like that's a Michael Scott joke. That's what she said. No, that doesn't quite work.